One of the things that was really important in the early years was that we not only support labor fights. I think there was this idea, like, we came together to support parking workers organizing. Like, I think the beginnings of the coalition were really in the community and labor and faith solidarity that got built around the efforts of parking workers to organize. And then some of the folks around that said, like, this is powerful. Like, we should actually keep this together. We should make this, like, permanent and make it not just for this one fight, but something that actually is going to build solidarity and is going to support fights in the future.
What brought me into the labor movement was the idea that the labor movement was a social justice movement. And even though we represented workers at the workplace, it was more than that. So that was the vision that I had of labor. It's a social justice movement. But how do we get labor engaged in other things other than the workplace issues? So a group of us, small group, started talking before it became JWG. We just started talking. How do we get and work together? How do we build a movement where people don't see each individual parts, but see the bigger group coming together to work for common issues? Hence, this concept of a institution that could bring us all together. That would be the hub. You have all these spokes, and then you had the hub here, and we all were tied together through that hub. And the hub became Jobs with Justice.
We had a retreat, a day-long retreat, to say, how do we work together? And that is my earliest recollection of, I would say, really being with a group of folks that were more than just labor unions. Because labor unions are used to working with each other. We do coalition, the Teamsters, and HERE, but this was going to be a little bit more of a larger group with a larger vision. And I remember sitting with, I think it was Tristan Faulkner, who since has passed, sitting in a meeting, I think it was at the Teamsters Hall, and just coming up with a vision and a plan about how we were going to really build justice for people, not just workers, but people in the District of Columbia.
Well, at the time, I was the organizing director for One DC, Organizing Neighborhood Equity DC, and there was a big commotion in Ward 5 about the idea of creating a worker center for a lot of immigrant workers in the vicinity around a Home Depot, and the backlash was astounding and horrifying, and it was very clear that some of our elected officials, as well as other unsavory folks, were very much trying to pit communities against each other, and it was working. And DC Jobs with Justice said, like, look, this is not sustainable, and brought together, created a Black and Brown coalition with the Fair Budget Coalition, and really started bringing folks together in community to start having these conversations, and to have this sort of this biracial or multiracial space to talk about sort of shared experiences and to build community that way.
We were targeting development going on at George Washington University, and Jobs with Justice was able to tap into student groups there. They're very active.
Our school is kind of jokingly referred to as a real estate company masked in a school. And so the sort of like development strategy is actually a big part of the school's finances.
They were doing a lot of development, doing it with no real labor standards other than DC's minimum wage, which is not what it is now, is much lower, $1 over minimum wage. And overtime after 40, that was about the extent of their labor standards, and yet they're building this, student housing, other places for the most expensive university in the country, perhaps the world. It seems that they would have some labor standards there to draw, to make sure that these workers also could benefit from these hard, dangerous jobs. DC
Jobs with Justice had, thrown down with the union to get justice for workers. So the campaign was called Justice at Wings, and our little student group on the George Washington University campus, Progressive Student Union, kind of joined the campaign.
I didn't get familiar though with Jobs to Justice probably about 7 years ago. And, the union just invited me out And I came out, and we, at the particular time, we were fighting Walmart. It was one of the many fights of Walmart. And we were, it had to do with the issue where their warehouse, and they had the big fire, and a lot of people lost their lives. And so our local Walmart, which happens to be downtown, we were just fighting. We went down with Jobs for Justice, and it was like, hey, you know, who wants to go serve the letter to the manager? And I was like, I don't know, but okay, I'll do it. And so, you know, we did that a couple of times, and that was actually my first organizing outreach that I ever did. So it was with Jobs for Justice. And I don't think that I realized pretty much that first time, but getting involved was the best thing that I could have did, and it has become a passion of mine since then.
Too often, the hearings and the policy process in the district is dominated by the voices of advocates, people who may care a lot and know a lot, but aren't the people with lived experience. And that really is one of the ways that DC Jobs with Justice is unique, is that, number one, their work is grounded in hearing directly from affected communities, and then taking those voices and bringing those people into the Wilson Building, whether it's for a rally, to testify at a hearing, or a meeting directly with a policymaker. DC Jobs with Justice is unique in directly connecting workers with the policymakers who need to hear about what their experiences are like and how the economy and district policy is not treating them right.
So every good action has good visuals, and as the resident intern, one of the youngest members of the team, it was tasked to me to think about what are some good visuals here. And I can't remember in all honesty, I can't remember if it was my original idea to come up with this cell phone costume, but regardless, I remember there being a very large box that we covered in gray paint with the cell phone, and it went over your head and your arms stuck out the sides. And a lot of very eager people got to take pictures with the cell phone costume.
Story of this picture was Jobs with Justice had their national convention here, and I was just getting ready to go to the national, and Tristan talked me into emceeing this huge rally outside of, I think it was the Walmart lobbyist office, and you know, I was nervous, and I remember I was chanting something wrong. And I was like about to freak out. My daughters were in the audience and they were rooting for me. And Tristan was behind, he sneaks behind the canvas and he starts, you're doing great, you know, telling me what to say. And you know, I was like, oh God, thank you. But I was chanting, I forgot what I was saying, like if we don't get it, shut us down or something. And everybody was just going with it, and I was just so embarrassed. And Tristan was like, you're doing great, keep going.
The DC Worker Retention Act. And the Retention Act was designed to force employers to bring back people who had previously worked in establishments, largely in the hospitality industry, but the legislation extended to a variety of different sectors beyond the hospitality industry. It provides that employers must bring back those people that worked at the establishments prior to the pandemic. And it's sad that we need a law like that, but so many of the employers were intent on getting rid of old employees, getting cheaper employees, getting rid of employees who had accrued benefits, those types of things. And so the work that DC Jobs with Justice did on that was critically important in terms of not only working with us to lobby on the legislation, but bringing along all those advocacy groups. So individual workers way beyond the confines of our membership are going back to work as a result of this, and DC Jobs with Justice played a critical part in that.
So one example that stands out to me is the Just Pay Coalition fight that DC Jobs with Justice was a major player in. One action they did in particular that I attended that really changed how I thought about things as a labor organizer was they had an action outside of a building site for Power Design. And Power Design had been stealing wages from their workers. And it's not abnormal for people to protest wage theft, but As a labor organizer, it's very unusual to have a community organization lead an action and organize an action on your behalf. And it was the first time, I think, for me that I actually saw that neighbors would stand up for workers in what seems like an employment fight, because they could see the connectedness between the development in DC that's happening and the way people are being gentrified out and the exploitation of the workers at the work site.
One clear example during the pandemic when DC Jobs with Justice was able to bring multiple different groupings of people together to have a stronger voice was in the fight to include excluded workers in the DC Relief Fund that was meant to provide financial support to folks that were negatively impacted by the pandemic. So folks that weren't able to work as much would have access to local funding explicitly because they were excluded from federal funding, right, from the stimulus. And so, you know, with our DC chapter, because we're also smaller in this area, it's made a huge difference in terms of like amplifying like our demands within the broader coalition and then separately that are more domestic worker specific.
I would say to people, keep your eyes and ears open and understand that what's happening, that what is happening to some of your fellow residents of the District of Columbia can happen to you and can happen to people whom you know. Reach out to communities. If you're involved in any social groups, whether it be church or some other group, take a look at these things and see if they don't concern you. You know, the humanitarian in me says that I should be and must be involved in those kinds of things. And I would hope that humanity in each of us would push us to become active around these kinds of issues, these issues that we see in the community every day.
As a national network, you know, we've been around almost 35 years, the 35th anniversary next year. And DC Jobs with Justice has been one of the most consistent coalitions in the network. I mean, many affiliates ebb and flow, and you know, your leadership transitions and things are hard, and you know, DC's not completely immune to that, but the coalition itself has had such a powerful leadership base amongst the people of the city and amongst the organizations and unions and faith institutions in the city that it's been able to withstand so many political wins. And so yeah, I definitely lift up DC Jobs for Justice as one of our powerful, you know, important model affiliates.
DC Jobs with Justice is an ever-changing organization that's rooted in very strong values. We continue to fight for more power for working people, for tenants, for neighbors, for communities, for the Black residents in DC who are being pushed out at disproportionate rates, for immigrant communities who continue to be disenfranchised in a myriad ways, for workers whose work is not valued in the ways that it should be. Who knows what those threats and fights will look like over the next 20 years, but Jobs with Justice is rooted in our values, in our relationships, and our commitment to being there for whatever those fights are.
I encourage people to become part of DC Jobs with Justice because there's space for everyone. It is all inclusive. It is diverse in race, gender, economic status, interest. There's a space for everyone, and we don't live in silos. We don't have identities that are in silos. I'm a mother, I'm a worker, I'm a voter, and Jobs with Justice is the place where we can talk deliberately about that intersectionality and be powerful in those various roles. DC Jobs with Justice is literally the glue of the social justice movement, labor and community movement work in DC. So I don't think it makes sense for anyone to come to DC and not be a part of DC Jobs with Justice. If you want to know your landscape and build relationships, that's the table that you need to be at.